With South Park, the thing with it is it makes fun of everything, right? Like there's nothing beyond making fun of South Park, but does that make it okay? So I think it's interesting to look at like who's telling it and does that make it okay? But even to look a little deeper and say, even if this person's telling it, it still is probably doing division in certain areas for certain people, which I think you guys said. Anyway, another example story that someone might be willing to share?
My boyfriend is an intern for a state representative, and they were presenting a bill to everybody else. It just happened to be a bill to make it not possible to take your welfare debit card and take out money from welfare at strip clubs or by liquor stores, and they happened to be presenting it on Valentine's Day. And the representative that he works for is like brand new. He just got elected in, and while each person was going around voting, all the Republicans were like making jokes about it, like calling it, making up these names about the Valentine's Day bill or this or that. And when he was telling me about it, I thought, oh, that's great. They were being nice and making jokes about each other's wives and strip clubs. Valentine's Day, and he's like, no, they were just like hazing him because he was a brand new, representative.
So the new representative was
the one
telling the joke?
He was the one proposing the bill.
Proposing the bill.
For everybody to vote on.
Others were.
And everybody else, like, as they were voting on it, they have to say their little plug about it, and then say if they vote for it or against it. And before they would say they were for or against it, I wish I could think of one, because they were actually pretty funny, but they were just things about, like politicians' wives and tying it back to Valentine's Day and stuff.
Gotcha.
And I thought that was just kind of like putting a distance between like the Republicans and the Democrats and the new guy and the experienced guys. So even, I'm seeing sarcasm as a part of that, which we've kind of identified in our context. Because like even I thought it was funny, but he was like, no, it was actually kind of awkward.
I also wonder if that would create a problem in terms of like socioeconomic status. If you're voting on a bill that will limit where welfare can be used, that could be a pretty fine line, I would imagine, when you start making jokes about that on Valentine's Day and that sort of thing. Interesting. No, that's a really neat example. Anybody else have?
I have kind of it's a stupid story, but I think it gets at like maybe a bigger point. My friend threw away a bunch of condiments in our refrigerator, and I kept giving her a hard time about it. And like constantly, if I would go back and I would go to use a condiment, I would like give her a hard time, like, oh, I guess I'm not my ketchup because somebody threw it away, and like would make jokes about it. And one day we had gotten this big, huge blow-up fight about it because she felt so bad, and I kept making jokes about it. And I think, I wasn't intentionally making jokes to, send her a bigger message that I was really upset about it because I really didn't care. But I think that can be an instance when humor is really divisive, is when people use it as a venue for being, coming around the back and...
Guilt.
Yeah.
And even in that one's the miscommunication about what's really going on behind the joke and understanding it differently than you meant it to be understood. What are some other things that make humor divisive? We've got a pretty good list going here. What are other things that come to mind?
I don't know if anyone's touched on what to me is one of the most obvious ones, where you're just flat out making fun of an entire culture. You're standing yourself on one side and saying the other side is somehow inferior. Phelan and I were saying we're both from Texas, and in a lot of small towns, people are still small-minded and make a lot of cultural jokes about, other races and things, and just saying, they're below, the jokes are all basically, well, they're below us somehow. Mm-hmm. And it's a great indicator for me. It tells you a lot about that person and how they were raised, or the kind of schools they grew up in with their, common students and things that were acceptable in their families.
Right, right. No, I think that's a great point. I think it's a huge issue. I grew up in a small town too in Michigan, and it's the same sort of thing. Would you put anything up there besides stereotyping? That's what I kind of picked out as the big theme there.
No, that's maybe the main one.
I think it's interesting to know how that kind of goes back to what Mark was talking about, how like with those stereotypes, it's okay for like Chris Rock to make fun of, you know, black stereotypes, but you know, what'd you say, Larry the Cable Guy is, you know, if he does that, then he's gonna get a whole bunch of, you know, or like Jon Stewart always, you know, makes fun of the fact that he's Jewish, but so it's just interesting how if you're making fun of what you are, it's okay.
I would add with that, the intent oftentimes matters to many people. And I would still say for any joke that's going to be stereotyping about certain people, even if it's funny to some people by some people, it still matters what the intent is. It takes a little, it's complex. Yeah.
We also talked about inside jokes and how who doesn't know the joke is like extremely divided. You know, it's very clearly like we're the in group, and if you don't get to know what our inside joke is, then I don't know. I think that's a very
That's huge.
yeah. It's like, especially like I mean, it starts when you're little kids. We were talking about like elementary school, and you always have some secret code where I don't know, like some secret thing, and then there's some girl that doesn't know, and it causes all this like drama when you're a little kid. But it's like even when you grow up, I still feel like you can kind of get a sense of it, like you're like, there's some sort of joke going on that I don't know about, and it just, you know what I mean? It definitely is a way to kind of send messages of exclusion or inclusion if someone kind of pulls you aside and tells you, you know.
That's a great point. There's I was just watching interviews from people who had gone through culture shock, and I think all of them had been moving to the United States. But it was interesting because there was an overwhelming theme of when they felt, or when culture shock hit them the most, was when there were people telling jokes and they didn't know what was going on and they'd just go back to their room and cry. Anyway, it was just interesting how resounding that theme was, how out you feel of it if you don't understand what's going on. Not to mention when we're telling jokes that make fun of another group and then somebody feels more marginalized being part of that out group. Any last ones? I'm gonna move us, yeah?
Like laughing at another person's expense, you know, someone falls. And
Yeah.
so
Like if you choose to run to their aid and help them and laugh with them versus laugh at them.
You're so valiant.
I
thought you were saying run at them and then laugh at them.
Laugh with them.
We're gonna laugh at them.
Still kind of laughing at them.
Well, I always laugh when I fall.
Kind of goes along with what Anna said about the